If you cannot afford something nicer to wear, this store probably is not for you. The comment floated across the sales floor, followed by a burst of laughter. Several employees standing near the front entrance exchanged amused looks, clearly pleased with themselves. A few customers glanced over briefly before returning to their shopping. The woman at the center of the attention did not react. She simply paused near a display table and continued examining a neatly folded sweater as though she had not heard a word. The store occupied nearly 30,000 square feet inside one of the busiest shopping centers in the state. Bright lighting reflected off polished floors. Seasonal displays filled the aisles. Soft music drifted from ceiling speakers. Everything appeared successful, organized, and welcoming, at least on the surface. The woman standing quietly beside the display looked nothing like the customers most employees expected to impress. She wore a simple gray cardigan, comfortable slacks, and well-worn walking shoes. There were no designer logos, no expensive jewelry, no obvious signs of wealth. Her appearance was neat and professional, but modest enough that several employees had already decided she did not belong among the store's preferred clientele. One sales associate leaned toward another. She has been looking at prices for 10 minutes. The second employee smiled. Maybe she is calculating how much she can afford. More laughter followed. The woman calmly adjusted the sleeve of the sweater she was holding. Her expression never changed. Across the store, Brandon Keller watched the interaction from near the customer service desk. As regional manager, he considered himself an expert at reading people. He believed appearance revealed everything important: confidence, status, success, value. Within seconds of noticing the woman, he had already placed her into a category in his mind. Not important, not influential, certainly not someone capable of affecting his career. Brandon straightened his tie and walked toward the group. The employees immediately became more careful with their behavior, though faint smiles remained on their faces. "Is there a problem?" he asked. One employee shrugged. "Nothing serious." Another nodded toward the woman. "She has just been browsing for a while." Brandon glanced at her outfit. His eyes lingered for a moment before he offered a thin smile. "Well, everyone is welcome to browse." His tone sounded polite, but something beneath the words suggested otherwise. The woman finally looked up. Her eyes moved calmly from one employee to another. Then she returned her attention to the display. The lack of reaction seemed to bother Brandon more than any argument would have. Most people became defensive when judged. Most people tried to explain themselves. This woman did neither. She simply observed. A few minutes later, she approached another section of the store and studied a framed plaque hanging on the wall. It displayed the company's core values: respect, integrity, service, excellence. She read each word carefully. Then she looked around the store again. Her gaze lingered on the employees, on the customers, on the conversations happening nearby. She seemed less interested in shopping than in understanding something. Brandon noticed. "Can I help you find anything?" he asked. The woman smiled politely. "Actually, I have a few questions." Brandon folded his arms. "About what?" She glanced once more at the plaque before answering. "About how people are treated here." The smile disappeared from Brandon's face. And for the first time that afternoon, something about the quiet woman made him unexpectedly uneasy. Brandon Keller studied the woman carefully, trying to understand why her simple question bothered him. Most customers either wanted assistance or wanted to be left alone. They rarely stood in front of a company values display and asked questions about culture. Yet something about her calm demeanor made him feel as though he was the one being evaluated. Around them, the afternoon shopping crowd moved through the aisles carrying bags and examining seasonal merchandise. The store remained busy, but several employees had begun paying attention to the conversation. The woman looked once more at the plaque mounted on the wall. Respect, integrity, service, excellence. The polished silver letters reflected the bright overhead lighting. "Those are strong values," she said. Brandon forced a smile. "They are the foundation of our company." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "How are new employees trained to apply them?" Brandon blinked. The question seemed oddly specific. "We have training programs," he answered. "Everyone completes them." The woman smiled politely. "And after training?" Brandon hesitated. "What do you mean?" She gestured gently toward the sales floor. "Values are easy to print on a wall. I was wondering how they appear in everyday interactions." A nearby employee exchanged an uncertain glance with a coworker. The question sounded simple, but nobody seemed eager to answer it. The woman slowly walked toward another display. Brandon followed. He noticed she moved with quiet confidence, never rushing, never appearing intimidated. Most people reacted differently after becoming the target of jokes. She had not shown the slightest sign of embarrassment. In fact, she seemed more interested in observing than shopping. She paused beside a rack of jackets and looked at a young sales associate arranging merchandise. "How long have you worked here?" she asked kindly. "About 8 months," the employee replied. "Do you enjoy it?" The employee looked surprised by the question. "Most days." The woman nodded. "That is good." Then she asked something unexpected. "What makes a customer feel welcome?" The associate glanced toward Brandon before answering. "Being treated with respect." The woman smiled warmly. "I agree." For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The simplicity of the exchange created an uncomfortable silence. Brandon quickly stepped forward. "Our team takes customer service seriously." The woman turned toward him. "I hope so." Her tone remained pleasant, yet Brandon found himself becoming increasingly defensive. Across the store, a few employees continued whispering among themselves. Some still appeared amused by her appearance. Others were beginning to wonder why she seemed so interested in the company's culture. The woman continued moving through different departments, asking occasional questions. Nothing aggressive, nothing confrontational. Yet each question seemed designed to reveal something. How were employees recognized? How were complaints handled? What qualities were rewarded in management? The answers varied. Some sounded rehearsed. Others sounded uncertain. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the large front windows, the woman eventually returned to the area near the values display. She folded her hands and quietly studied the plaque once again. Brandon approached, determined to regain control of the conversation. "You seem very interested in how we operate," he said. The woman met his gaze. "I am." Brandon gave a small laugh. "Why?" The woman looked around the store, observing the employees, the customers, and the atmosphere they created together. Then she answered with a calmness that made Brandon unexpectedly uneasy. "Because the way people behave when they think nobody important is watching usually tells the truth about an organization." Brandon Keller laughed softly, but the sound carried less confidence than before. The woman standing in front of him remained composed, almost impossibly calm. While several employees continued watching from nearby departments, she seemed entirely unaffected by the attention. If anything, the uncomfortable atmosphere appeared to interest her. She glanced around the store once more, carefully observing details most shoppers would never notice. A sales associate helping a customer, a cashier greeting an elderly couple, a manager speaking to an employee near the stockroom entrance. Nothing escaped her attention. What nobody in the building realized was that this was not the first store she had visited that month. Over the past several years, the woman had quietly developed a habit. Without advance notice, she would visit company locations across the country dressed exactly as she was now. No assistants, no security team, no executive entourage, just comfortable clothes and a willingness to observe. The reason was simple. Reports could be polished. Presentations could be rehearsed. Surveys could be manipulated. But everyday behavior revealed the truth. When people believed they were interacting with an ordinary customer, their real attitudes appeared. Their real values surfaced. Their real character emerged. The woman had learned that lesson long ago. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, she watched people underestimate others based on appearance every day. She never forgot it. Even after achieving extraordinary success, she continued living with remarkable simplicity. She drove practical vehicles, wore comfortable clothing, preferred small neighborhood restaurants over expensive establishments. Wealth had changed her circumstances, but it had never changed her perspective. Meanwhile, Brandon remained convinced he understood exactly who stood before him. In his mind, confidence came from titles, appearance, and status symbols. He noticed watches, shoes, designer labels, luxury handbags. Those details helped him decide how much respect someone deserved. The irony was that he worked for a company founded by someone who believed the opposite. Across the sales floor, several employees continued whispering among themselves. One associate glanced toward the woman and shook her head. "She keeps asking questions like she owns the place." Another employee laughed. "Maybe she thinks she is a secret shopper." More quiet laughter followed. The woman heard every word, yet her expression remained unchanged. She slowly walked toward a display featuring the company's newest seasonal collection. Above the merchandise hung a large framed photograph of the company's earliest store. The image showed a modest location with simple shelves and a small team standing proudly in front of the entrance. The woman stopped and studied the photograph carefully. Her eyes lingered on it longer than expected. Brandon noticed. "Interesting picture, isn't it?" he said. The woman smiled faintly. "Very." Brandon stepped beside her. "The company has come a long way since those days." The woman nodded. "It certainly has." Her tone carried a deeper meaning that Brandon completely missed. She continued studying the photograph for another moment before asking a simple question. "Do employees still know why this company was started?" Brandon immediately answered. "To grow a successful retail brand." The woman looked at him. "Is that what they teach now?" Brandon frowned slightly. Something about the question felt like a challenge. Before he could respond, the woman glanced back at the old photograph and quietly shook her head. Then she said something that made Brandon unexpectedly uncomfortable. "Sometimes companies become so focused on growth that they forget the reason people believed in them in the first place." And as the afternoon continued, the gap between what Brandon believed he was seeing and the truth growing quietly around him became even wider. The longer Vanessa Reed remained in the store, the more Brandon Keller wanted her to leave. He could not explain the feeling. On the surface, she had done nothing wrong. She had not raised her voice. She had not complained. She had not demanded special treatment. Yet every question she asked seemed to expose something uncomfortable beneath the polished image the store worked so hard to maintain. Brandon prided himself on running one of the highest-performing locations in the region. Sales numbers were strong. Corporate reports looked excellent. Customer traffic remained steady. Those metrics mattered to him because they proved success. At least that was what he believed. Vanessa slowly walked toward the customer service area and observed an interaction between an employee and an elderly shopper. The conversation remained polite, but she noticed subtle details. The employee smiled at customers who appeared affluent. The enthusiasm faded noticeably when assisting others. It was a small thing, easy to miss. Vanessa did not miss it. She thanked the employee for helping the shopper and continued walking. Several staff members watched her with increasing curiosity. Others remained openly dismissive. One associate glanced at Vanessa's cardigan and whispered something that caused two coworkers to laugh. Vanessa heard them. She simply continued observing. Brandon approached again. "You seem very interested in our operations." Vanessa smiled. "People reveal a lot through everyday choices." Brandon forced a laugh. "Most customers focus on the merchandise." "Perhaps," Vanessa replied. "But merchandise is not what customers remember most." Brandon frowned. "What do they remember?" Vanessa looked around the store. How they were treated. The answer lingered in the air. Nearby employees pretended not to listen, but their attention remained fixed on the conversation. Vanessa moved toward another section and stopped beside a display highlighting the company's mission statement. Large letters printed across the wall described respect, inclusion, and dignity. She read every word carefully. Then she glanced across the sales floor. The contrast between the message and the behavior she had witnessed throughout the afternoon could not have been clearer. Brandon noticed where she was looking. "We take those values seriously." Vanessa turned toward him. "Do you?" The question landed harder than he expected. Before Brandon could answer, one employee walked past and quietly muttered, "She acts like she is conducting an inspection." Another laughed. "Maybe she should inspect her wardrobe first." A few nearby associates smiled. Vanessa remained perfectly calm. Not angry, not embarrassed, simply thoughtful. That reaction frustrated Brandon more than any argument could have. He expected criticism. He expected complaints. Instead, she continued collecting information. Every joke, every dismissive glance, every careless remark. The store suddenly felt less like a retail location and more like a test nobody realized they were taking. Vanessa slowly folded her hands and looked once more at the company values displayed on the wall. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the front windows illuminated the polished frame. For a moment, she seemed almost disappointed. Not in the employees alone, in something larger, something deeper. Then she asked one final question. If someone walked into this store today with no title, no status, and no obvious wealth, how would you know they deserved respect? Brandon opened his mouth to answer. Nothing came out, because for the first time since she arrived, He realized he did not actually know how to respond. And while the employees continued assuming they understood exactly who Vanessa Reed was, they remained completely unaware that the most important visitor their store would see all year was quietly standing right in front of them. The tension inside the store continued building, even though nobody openly acknowledged it. Vanessa Reed remained calm, moving through the sales floor with the same quiet patience she had shown since arriving. Yet the employees around her were becoming less careful. The longer she stayed, the more confident they became in their assumptions. In their minds, they had already decided who she was. An ordinary shopper, a curious customer, someone with no influence and no authority. The possibility that they might be wrong never crossed their minds. Brandon Keller checked his watch and sighed. He had important meetings later that afternoon and no desire to spend more time answering questions from a woman he considered unimportant. "Ma'am," he said, forcing a professional smile, "if there is a specific product you need help finding, my team would be happy to assist you." Vanessa looked at him thoughtfully. "Thank you. I am finding exactly what I came here to find." The answer irritated him. Around them, several employees exchanged amused glances. One associate quietly shook her head. "I still think she believes she is evaluating us." Another employee laughed. "Maybe she watches too many business shows." The small group chuckled. Vanessa heard every word. She simply continued observing. Her composure only encouraged them further. One employee walked past and glanced at her modest shoes. "You know," he said loudly enough for nearby coworkers to hear, "some people spend more time asking questions than improving their situation." A few employees laughed again. Brandon did not join them, but he did nothing to stop them either. That silence spoke volumes. Vanessa slowly turned toward the employee. For a brief moment, the store grew quiet. Several customers nearby sensed the tension and glanced over. The employee seemed to expect an argument. Instead, Vanessa smiled politely. Improving a situation begins with understanding it. The employee had no response. Yet the moment passed quickly, and the whispers resumed. The company values displayed throughout the store suddenly felt very far away. Respect, integrity, service, excellence. The words remained printed on walls and brochures, but the behavior unfolding beneath them told a different story. Brandon walked toward the customer service counter and motioned for a supervisor to join him. They spoke quietly for several moments while occasionally glancing toward Vanessa. Their expressions suggested annoyance rather than concern. Vanessa noticed. She had seen the same pattern many times before. People often revealed their true character when they believed someone possessed no power. That was why she conducted visits like this. Not to catch mistakes, not to embarrass people, but to discover whether the culture described in reports actually existed in real life. So far, the answer was disappointing. A few minutes later, Brandon approached once more. This time his patience appeared exhausted. "I think we have answered enough questions for one afternoon." His tone remained professional, but the message was clear. Vanessa looked around the store one final time. Employees watched openly now. Some appeared confident. Others seemed uneasy. Deep down, a few were beginning to suspect they might not fully understand the situation. Vanessa folded her hands and smiled gently. "You are right," she said. "I believe I have seen enough." Those words should have relieved Brandon. Instead, an unexpected feeling settled in his stomach. Because for reasons he could not explain, the moment felt less like the end of an inconvenience and more like the beginning of something he was not prepared for. The store seemed unusually quiet after Vanessa Reed said she had seen enough. Conversations continued, customers continued shopping, registers continued processing transactions, yet something subtle had changed. Even Brandon Keller felt it. The confidence that had fueled his dismissive attitude throughout the afternoon no longer felt quite as solid. He watched Vanessa standing near the large front windows where sunlight spilled across the polished floor in long golden lines. She was not angry. She was not frustrated. If anything, she looked disappointed. That expression unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. Vanessa slowly turned toward the framed company values one final time. Respect, integrity, service, excellence. The words reflected softly beneath the afternoon light. For several moments, she simply stood there, studying them in silence. Nearby employees continued their work, though many glanced in her direction. Some still appeared amused. Others seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Deep down, they knew something about the day had not gone well. They just could not explain why. Vanessa remembered the earliest days of the company, back when there had been only one small store, back when every customer mattered because every customer represented trust. She remembered helping stock shelves before sunrise. She remembered greeting customers by name. She remembered the promise that had guided every decision. Treat people with dignity, regardless of what they looked like, what they earned, or what they owned. The company had grown far beyond those beginnings. Thousands of employees now worked across dozens of locations. Success had arrived. Recognition had arrived. Revenue had arrived. Yet standing inside this store, Vanessa could not help wondering how much of the original spirit had survived. Across the sales floor, Brandon spoke quietly with several supervisors. Their conversation drifted toward sales goals, staffing schedules, and operational metrics. Numbers, targets, performance indicators. Vanessa listened from a distance. Those things mattered, but she noticed something missing. Nobody mentioned customers. Nobody mentioned culture. Nobody mentioned respect. The silence surrounding those subjects seemed louder than any conversation. A young cashier near the front registers glanced toward Vanessa and offered a small smile. It was genuine, kind, unforced. Vanessa returned the smile warmly. That simple interaction reminded her that not everything was lost. Good people still existed inside the organization. The challenge was whether leadership recognized them. The afternoon light continued shifting across the store. Customers came and went. Shopping bags rustled softly. Music drifted through the speakers overhead. For a brief moment, the entire scene felt strangely peaceful. Yet beneath that calm surface, an important truth waited just beyond the horizon. Vanessa checked the time and folded her hands. She did not need additional observations. The day had already revealed everything she needed to know. The comments, the assumptions, the behavior, the willingness of managers to tolerate disrespect when directed toward someone they believed lacked status. The evidence was complete. Brandon glanced toward her again. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly wished the afternoon had unfolded differently. He wished he had asked better questions. He wished he had paid closer attention. Most of all, he wished he understood why this seemingly ordinary visitor carried such unusual confidence. Vanessa took a slow breath and looked once more across the store she had spent years helping build. Her expression remained calm, but there was sadness in her eyes now. Not because of how she had been treated. She had experienced worse before. The sadness came from realizing how easily people abandoned principles when they believed nobody important was watching. And as the sunlight settled across the company values displayed on the wall, the store unknowingly stood on the edge of a moment that would change several careers before the day was over. The moment arrived so quietly that nobody noticed it at first. Vanessa Reed remained near the front of the store, standing beneath the company values displayed on the wall. The afternoon sun continued streaming through the glass entrance, casting warm light across the polished floor. Employees returned to their conversations. Customers continued browsing. Brandon Keller felt relieved that the unusual visit finally appeared to be ending. Then the front doors opened. A woman in a navy business suit entered carrying a tablet and a folder. She moved with purpose, her expression professional and focused. Several employees recognized her immediately. Megan Foster, Senior Vice President of Human Resources. Her presence alone was unusual. Corporate executives rarely visited without notice. Brandon straightened his posture instantly. "Megan," he said, forcing a confident smile as he walked toward her. "We were not expecting anyone from headquarters today." Megan barely acknowledged him. Instead, her eyes moved across the sales floor until they settled on Vanessa. The moment she saw her, her expression changed completely. Professional formality gave way to genuine respect. Without hesitation, she walked directly across the store. Employees watched curiously. Brandon frowned. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Megan stopped in front of Vanessa and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Ms. Reed." The entire store seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped. Employees looked up from registers and display tables. Brandon felt the blood drain from his face. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Megan." The exchange lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. Brandon stared at the two women in disbelief. He looked from Megan to Vanessa and back again, desperately trying to understand what he had just heard. The title, the respect, the familiarity. None of it fit the assumptions he had built throughout the afternoon. Megan glanced around the store. Her expression became serious as she noticed the atmosphere. She looked toward Brandon. Has everything gone smoothly during the visit? Brandon opened his mouth. No words emerged. Vanessa answered calmly. The visit has been very informative. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. The confidence they had displayed earlier vanished almost instantly. Suddenly, every joke felt dangerous. Every whispered comment felt memorable. Every dismissive look felt impossible to erase. Brandon finally managed to speak. Visit? Megan looked surprised. You did not know? The question landed like a weight across the room. Brandon said nothing. Megan looked at Vanessa, then back toward the staff. Realization slowly appeared on her face. She understood exactly what had happened. The silence growing throughout the store told her everything she needed to know. Vanessa remained composed. She showed no anger, no satisfaction, no desire to embarrass anyone. If anything, she looked disappointed that events had unfolded this way. Megan turned toward the employees. You are standing in front of the founder of this company. The words echoed through the store. Several employees visibly froze. One associate covered her mouth. Another lowered his eyes immediately. Brandon felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Founder. Not just an executive. Not just a corporate leader. The founder. The person whose photograph hung on the wall. The person whose values were printed throughout the building. The person whose vision had created every opportunity inside the company. Vanessa slowly looked around the room. Nobody laughed now. Nobody whispered. Nobody seemed interested in appearances anymore. For the first time all afternoon, everyone was seeing her clearly. And as the weight of the truth settled across the sales floor, Brandon realized that every assumption he had made about the quiet woman in the gray cardigan had just collapsed in front of the entire store. The silence that followed felt heavier than any speech. Employees stood frozen throughout the store, struggling to process what they had just learned. The woman they had dismissed, judged, and quietly mocked was not simply an executive visiting from headquarters. She was the person who had built the company from the ground up. The person whose photograph appeared in the historical display. The person whose values hung framed on the walls around them. Vanessa Reed remained exactly as she had been all afternoon. Calm, composed, thoughtful. Nothing about her posture changed. Nothing about her expression suggested anger. Yet somehow that made the moment even more difficult for everyone else. Brandon Keller lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. For the first time since she arrived, he saw her differently. Not because of her title, not because of her authority, but because he suddenly understood how much dignity she had shown while others offered so little in return. Megan Foster quietly handed Vanessa a folder containing the evaluation materials from the visit. Vanessa accepted it without opening it. Her attention remained on the people standing around her. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked frightened. Others seemed unable to meet her gaze at all. The reality of their behavior had become impossible to avoid. Brandon finally stepped forward. His voice sounded very different now. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the certainty. Ms. Reed, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Vanessa listened without interrupting. Brandon took a slow breath. I made assumptions about you the moment you walked into this store. Several employees lowered their heads. They knew the statement applied to more than one person. Brandon continued. I failed to demonstrate the standards I expect from others. And I failed to uphold the values this company claims to represent. The words were sincere. For the first time all afternoon, he was speaking honestly. Vanessa nodded slightly. Thank you for saying that. The response surprised him. There was no anger in her voice. No humiliation. No desire to make him suffer. Only honesty. Megan watched quietly from nearby. She had seen many executives respond differently in similar situations. Vanessa's restraint never surprised her anymore. It was one of the reasons employees throughout the company respected her so deeply. Vanessa slowly looked around the store. The disappointing part is not what happened to me, she said. Everyone listened carefully. The disappointing part is what would have happened if I truly had been the person you assumed I was. The statement settled heavily across the room. Nobody spoke. Vanessa continued. A company's character is revealed by how it treats people who appear to have no influence. No title, no power, no status. Several employees looked toward the company values displayed on the wall. Respect, integrity, service, excellence. The words seemed larger now, more personal, more demanding. Vanessa folded her hands. Those principles were never meant to impress investors or decorate stores. Her gaze moved across the room. They were meant to guide behavior when nobody important seemed to be watching. The irony of the moment was impossible to miss. All afternoon, everyone believed nobody important was watching. Yet the most important observer in the company had been standing among them the entire time. Brandon nodded slowly. The lesson had landed. Not because he feared consequences, because he finally understood the mistake. Vanessa glanced toward the front entrance where sunlight continued pouring through the glass doors. The day was nearing its end. The evaluation was complete. The truth was visible. And while several careers now stood at a crossroads, Vanessa felt no satisfaction in that reality. Only hope that people could still learn from it. 3 months later, the store looked very different. The sales floor remained bright and busy. Customers continued filling the aisles, and seasonal displays still lined the entrance, but something deeper had changed. New leadership had been installed. Training programs had been redesigned. Every employee now completed workshops focused not only on performance and sales, but also on respect, empathy, and accountability. The company values displayed on the walls were no longer treated as decoration. They had become expectations. Vanessa Reed visited the location again on a quiet afternoon. Just as before, she wore simple clothes. Just as before, she arrived without an entourage. Yet this visit felt completely different. Employees greeted customers warmly. Associates offered assistance without judging appearances. Managers spent time on the sales floor instead of hiding in offices. The atmosphere felt genuine. Vanessa slowly walked through the store, observing the details she always noticed. An elderly customer received patient assistance. A young family was welcomed with enthusiasm. A woman carrying worn shopping bags received the same attention as a customer wearing expensive designer clothing. Nobody appeared to care about status. They cared about service. Near the front entrance, Vanessa paused beside the same company values plaque she had studied during her previous visit. Respect, integrity, service, excellence. Sunlight reflected softly across the polished frame. This time, the words felt alive. A store manager approached and greeted her kindly without recognizing who she was. Vanessa smiled. That simple interaction told her more than any report ever could. Across the company, similar changes had begun spreading. Leaders discussed culture differently. Hiring standards evolved. Performance reviews included measures of character alongside results. The lesson from that afternoon had traveled far beyond a single location. Meanwhile, Brandon Keller's departure had become a reminder throughout the organization. Not a story about punishment. A story about consequences. A story about how quickly success can become meaningless when respect disappears. Vanessa never spoke publicly about him. She never celebrated what happened. In her view, the real victory was not someone losing a position. The real victory was seeing people grow. Seeing employees understand that dignity should never depend on appearance, wealth, race, or status. As she prepared to leave, Vanessa glanced once more around the store. Customers smiled. Employees worked together. The environment felt healthier, more human. Megan Foster, who had quietly accompanied her during part of the visit, joined her near the entrance. "What do you think?" she asked. Vanessa looked across the sales floor and smiled softly. "I think they remembered who they wanted to be." Megan nodded. The answer seemed perfect. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the parking lot in shades of gold. Vanessa stepped through the front doors and paused briefly before walking toward her car. A gentle breeze moved across the warm air. Behind her, the store continued operating normally. No announcements, no applause, no speeches, just people doing their jobs with greater awareness than before. Vanessa looked toward the horizon and allowed herself a small smile. The company she built had never been about clothing. It had never been about profit alone. It had always been about people. And as the sunlight slowly faded across the sky, the most important lesson of all remained quietly behind. The way we treat others when they seem powerless reveals who we truly are when nobody believes we are being watched.